I was sitting in my study when Franklin barged in, after 6 years of silence, flanked by some slick attorney I had never seen before. His first words weren't "Hello, Dad," or "I've missed you." Instead, he pointed his finger at me and said, "Everyone knows you're not in your right mind anymore. 6 years of nothing, and now he returns because of rumors about my will." The entitlement in his eyes was unmistakable. What my son didn't realize was that I had already signed a new will a month ago, and his name barely appeared in it. The cold interaction with Franklin felt like the culmination of decades of growing distance. Where did it all go wrong? I tried to pinpoint the exact moment our relationship began to fracture, but there wasn't one dramatic breaking point, just a slow drift that accelerated after he finished college. I had always been there for my son. When he was growing up, I built my engineering firm from nothing into a successful business, working 70-hour weeks to ensure he had everything I never had as a child. Private school, summer camps, the best college his grades could get him into. I paid every bill without complaint, proud to give my boy opportunities. After college, Franklin struggled to find his footing. He'd call with business ideas: a tech startup, an import business, a restaurant concept, and I funded them all. Over 20 years, I invested more than $500,000 in his ventures, not as loans but as gifts. Each time, he assured me this was the big one that would make him financially independent. Each time, the business failed within a year. "Dad, these things happen to entrepreneurs," he'd say. Thomas Edison failed 1,000 times before inventing the light bulb. The difference was that Edison kept trying different approaches. Franklin made the same mistakes repeatedly, overspending on appearances, hiring friends instead of qualified people, losing interest when the initial excitement wore off. When Franklin met Andrea at 32, I was hopeful. She seemed ambitious and practical, qualities my son needed. They married quickly, and I welcomed her into our family. Mary, my wife of 40 years, tried especially hard to make Andrea feel included, sending birthday gifts and calling regularly. But Andrea made it clear we weren't her priority. During holiday visits, she'd spend most of her time on her phone, or suggest they stay at hotels rather than our guest room. When they moved to Seattle, 3,000 miles from our Connecticut home, I suspected she was behind the decision. After the move, our communication dwindled to occasional calls, almost always when Franklin needed money. He'd start with catching up, then casually mention a temporary cash flow issue or an unexpected expense. I sent checks, hoping each one would help stabilize them. Then Mary got sick. Cancer. It happened quickly, diagnosis to hospice in 8 months. During those terrible months, Franklin called exactly twice, both conversations lasting less than 10 minutes. When Mary died 3 years ago, the true depth of our estrangement became undeniable. Franklin called to say he couldn't make the funeral because of critical meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. I sat alone in the first pew of the church, where we'd baptized him 40 years earlier, accepting condolences from people who asked where my son was. I tried rebuilding our relationship after Mary's death. I called weekly, though he rarely answered. I sent birthday and Christmas gifts that received no acknowledgement. I even offered to fly them both to Hawaii, all expenses paid, for a family vacation. Franklin responded with a text, "Really busy this year. Maybe next time." I kept trying. I flew to Seattle twice. The first time, they canceled dinner plans at the last minute. The second time, they let me take them to an expensive restaurant, where Franklin spent most of the evening checking his phone while Andrea complained about their neighbors. The defining moment came on a random Tuesday, 10 months after Mary's funeral. I was mindlessly scrolling through Facebook, something I rarely did, when I saw photos posted by one of Andrea's friends. They showed Franklin and Andrea at the Eiffel Tower, smiling broadly. The timestamp showed they were taken during the week of Mary's funeral. The caption read, "Frank and Andy living it up in Paris. Number bucket list. Number Europe trip 2021. My son hadn't missed his mother's funeral because of work. He'd been vacationing in Europe with his wife, smiling for photos while I buried my life partner alone. I printed that photo and placed it in my desk drawer. Whenever I felt weak and considered giving Franklin another chance or sending more money, I looked at that picture. It became my inoculation against further disappointment. After that discovery, I stopped calling. I stopped sending money. I waited to see if Franklin would reach out when the well ran dry. He didn't. Not for 3 years. Until today, when he suddenly appeared, concerned about my mental health, or more accurately, concerned about his inheritance. After Mary died, grief became my constant companion. I wandered through our house, touching her things, the antique teacup collection she treasured, the gardening books with her neat notes in the margins, the quilt her grandmother had made that still smelled faintly of her perfume. I spoke to her picture. I slept on the couch because the bed felt too empty. My neighbor Sandra noticed my decline. Twice widowed herself, she recognized the signs of isolation. She started bringing over casseroles with strict instructions about reheating them properly. She insisted I join her for coffee on her porch every Thursday. At first, I went just to be polite. "Delmar, you need to get out of that house," she told me firmly one morning. "Volunteering saved me after Robert died. The community center needs help with their youth program. They need someone to teach those kids practical skills." I made excuses. I was too old. The kids wouldn't relate to me. I didn't have teaching experience. "Stop it," Sandra said. "You ran an engineering firm for 40 years. You can teach a teenager to change a tire or balance a checkbook. Just try it for one afternoon." To end the conversation, I agreed. The following Tuesday, I found myself at the West Side Community Center, a converted elementary school with walls painted in optimistic yellows and blues. The program director, Maureen, assigned me to the workshop space where a handful of teenagers were supposedly learning basic home repair and mechanical skills. What I actually found was a group of bored kids looking at their phones while a harried volunteer tried to demonstrate how to use a screwdriver. When I introduced myself, most barely looked up, but one skinny boy with serious eyes actually put his phone away and extended his hand. "I'm Josh," he said. "You know anything about engines?" That question was the beginning of everything. Josh was 17, whip-smart but struggling in school because of spotty attendance. His father had walked out 5 years earlier, leaving his mother Tara to raise him alone. She worked 12-hour nursing shifts, often overnight. Josh frequently stayed home to care for his younger sister when childcare fell through. I started by showing him how to perform basic car maintenance using my old Ford. Josh absorbed information like a sponge, asking questions that showed real mechanical aptitude. When he mentioned struggling with math, I offered to help with that too. Soon we had regular Tuesday and Thursday sessions at the center. "You remind me of myself at your age," I told him after he successfully diagnosed a timing belt issue. "I was always taking things apart to see how they worked. My dad used to yell at me for that," Josh said quietly. Said I was ruining everything I touched. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me hard. I thought of how I'd encouraged Franklin's curiosity, buying him extra Lego sets and science kits, never scolding him for the messes his experiments created. "Some people don't understand how learning works," I told Josh. "You have to take things apart before you can build something better." A month into our mentorship, Josh asked if I could help him with a school project, building a small-scale solar water heater. We worked in my garage over a weekend, Josh staying late each day, reluctant to leave even when we finished. When Tara came to pick him up, she seemed surprised by our rapport. "Josh hasn't stopped talking about your sessions," she said. "It's been a long time since I've seen him excited about anything." I invited them both for dinner the following weekend. Tara refused at first. "We don't want to impose," but I insisted. That dinner became another, then another. Soon they were coming over every Sunday. I learned that Tara had been taking night classes to become a nurse practitioner while working full-time. She'd had Josh young, at 25, and had been barely making ends meet since her husband left. Despite her exhaustion, she never complained, focusing instead on creating opportunities for Josh. Watching their relationship, I saw everything that had been missing with Franklin. Josh and Tara supported each other, made sacrifices for each other, showed genuine appreciation for each other's efforts. As months passed, our bonds strengthened. I attended Josh's high school basketball games. Tara and I took turns helping Josh prepare for his SATs. They insisted I join them for Thanksgiving, where I contributed Mary's famous cranberry relish using her handwritten recipe. For my 67th birthday, they surprised me with a small party. Josh gave me a handcrafted wooden box he'd made in shop class. Tara gave me a sweater she'd noticed me admiring in a store window months earlier. I couldn't remember the last time someone had paid such close attention to my preferences. When Josh's senior year began, I approached him about college. Have you thought about engineering programs? You have the aptitude for it. He lowered his eyes. Can't afford it. Mom's already working too much. What if money wasn't an issue? He looked confused. Josh, I'd like to pay for your education. Completely. Wherever you get in. The boy stared at me, then shook his head. I can't accept that. It's too much. I have more money than I need, and no one to leave it to. I said, not mentioning Franklin. I'd consider it an investment in your future. All I ask is that someday, when you're able, you help someone else the same way. After discussing it with Tara, who initially had the same hesitations as her son, Josh agreed. We spent evenings researching programs and working on applications. His grades had improved significantly over the past year, making several good schools realistic possibilities. One evening, I arrived at the community center earlier than usual for our session. Maureen pulled me aside. Did you know Josh has been working night shifts at Thompson's warehouse? I was stunned. That can't be right. He's in school all day, and he's with me several afternoons a week. Started about 3 months ago. Works from 11 to 5, then goes straight to school. One of our volunteers is the shift supervisor there. When Josh arrived, I could see the exhaustion he'd been hiding, the shadows under his eyes, the slight slump in his usually straight posture. Why are you working nights without telling me? I asked. Is something wrong? Josh looked embarrassed. I wanted to help with the college expenses. I know tuition isn't the only cost. There's books and housing and food. Josh, I told you I'd cover everything. He hesitated. I know, but I was worried you might be struggling too. You live alone in that big house, and you're retired. I thought maybe you were being generous beyond what you could afford. I was speechless. This boy who had so little himself was working through the night because he was concerned about my financial well-being. The contrast with Franklin, who had taken hundreds of thousands without a second thought, couldn't have been more stark. That night, I added a 0 to the check I'd been planning to write for Josh's graduation gift. The next day, I called Barbara, my attorney, to discuss changing my will. Barbara Griffin had been my attorney for over 30 years. She'd handled everything from business contracts to real estate transactions, and of course, my estate planning. Her office hadn't changed much over the decades. Same dark wooden furniture, same wall of law books, same no-nonsense attitude. You want to do what? Barbara asked, adjusting her reading glasses. I want to substantially change my will. Franklin will receive a significantly reduced inheritance, with the bulk of my estate going elsewhere. Barbara leaned back in her chair. At 69, she'd been talking about retirement for years but never quite got around to it. We'd grown old together professionally, and she knew my family situation intimately. Delmar, disinheriting a child, even partially, often leads to legal challenges. The courts give special scrutiny to changes that occur late in life, especially after a significant loss like Mary's passing. I'm not disinheriting him completely. I'm thinking $100,000, which is still substantial. The rest will be divided between a trust for Josh's education and future, and a foundation for disadvantaged youth. Barbara removed her glasses. And you're doing this because? I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder that had grown thick over the years. This contains documentation of every attempt I've made to maintain a relationship with Franklin since Mary died. Unanswered phone calls, declined invitations, ignored messages. Also included is proof that he lied about missing her funeral, the Facebook photos of his European vacation that same week. Barbara examined the documents, her expression growing somber. I've also included a spreadsheet detailing every financial gift I've given Franklin since his college graduation. Over $500,000 total. None of it was ever repaid, despite some being characterized as loans at the time. She nodded slowly. This is helpful documentation. What about your current mental state? That's often the first angle of attack in contested wills. I'm prepared for that too. I've undergone a complete cognitive assessment with Dr. Rayburn last month. Perfect score. I've continued managing my own investments since retirement, with returns that beat market averages. I serve on 2 community boards and teach at the youth center. And this Josh? Tell me about him. I explained my relationship with Josh and Tara, being careful to emphasize that they had never asked for money or shown any interest in my financial situation. In fact, I concluded, Josh took a night job to avoid being a burden to me financially. Does that sound like someone trying to manipulate an old man? Barbara smiled slightly. It does not. But courts don't always see these situations clearly. Let's be thorough. I want you to get a second medical opinion confirming your capacity. We'll videotape your statement of intent regarding the will changes, and we'll ensure every modification follows proper legal procedure. Over the next 3 weeks, I completed everything Barbara suggested. A second neurologist confirmed my cognitive health. We recorded my statement explaining the rationale behind my decisions. Barbara brought in another attorney to independently verify that I was acting of my own free will. When everything was prepared, I signed the new will in Barbara's office, with her paralegal and an associate serving as witnesses. This is now legally binding, Barbara said, placing the document in a folder. We've taken every precaution against potential challenges. I'll keep the original in our fireproof safe, and here's your copy. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders as I placed my copy in my briefcase. For years, I'd been holding on to the hope that Franklin would somehow transform back into the son I'd raised. The will had been my last tether to that fantasy. Now I was facing reality, and there was a certain peace in that. As I prepared to leave, Barbara's receptionist appeared in the doorway. Miss Griffin, there's a call you should take. Dr. Rayburn's office. Barbara excused herself. When she returned a few minutes later, her expression had hardened. Someone claiming to be your son called Dr. Rayburn's office, requesting copies of your recent cognitive assessment. When told they couldn't release that information without your consent, this person suggested there were serious concerns about your mental capacity that the doctor should be aware of. My stomach tightened. Franklin's never shown any interest in my health before. That's not all. The receptionist mentioned that the same person had previously called asking detailed questions about your diagnosis and treatment history. Apparently, they've been doing this with several of your doctors. I sat back down, trying to process this information. When did this start? The calls to Dr. Rayburn began about 2 weeks ago, but she said her colleagues at the cardiac practice mentioned similar calls going back a month or more. A month around the time rumors about my will changes must have started circulating. Franklin hadn't visited or called to check on my well-being in years. Now, he was suddenly investigating my medical history. Has anyone else been asking about me? I asked. Barbara hesitated. My paralegal mentioned receiving a strange call last week from someone asking about recent changes to clients' estate plans. They didn't identify themselves as your son, but they asked specifically about whether any clients had established trusts for non-family members recently. The realization hit me. Franklin was conducting a stealth investigation into my finances and health, preparing for something, not out of concern for my well-being, but for his inheritance. Barbara, can we add an additional clause to the will? I want to explicitly state that my decisions are being made with full mental capacity and without undue influence, and that any challenge to the will based on false claims of incapacity will result in the challenger's portion being reduced to $1. Barbara smiled grimly. Already included in what you signed. I've been doing this a long time, Delmar. I know when to anticipate trouble. As I drove home, I felt a complex mix of emotions, sadness at the confirmation of Franklin's motives, anger at his behind-the-scenes manipulation, but also a strange sense of validation. I'd made the right decision with my will. Franklin's actions were proving it. What I didn't realize then was how quickly things would escalate, or that the confrontation brewing would soon erupt into my living room. Franklin's sudden appearance in my study that morning had been jarring enough. Now, as the initial shock wore off, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Where are your financial statements?" Franklin demanded, his lawyer hovering behind him like a vulture. "We need to review all your recent transactions." "You're not entitled to that information," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "My finances are private." "Not when you're being taken advantage of. Franklin snapped. Everyone knows you've been giving away the family money to strangers. That youth center? The college fund for some random kid? Dad, this is clearly financial elder abuse. The calculated way he said dad, a term he hadn't used in our infrequent communications for years, made my skin crawl. It was a performance for the benefit of his lawyer. I decide how to spend my money, Franklin. I earned it, and I'm fully capable of managing it. The lawyer stepped forward then, a thin man with an expensive haircut and cufflinks that probably cost more than my first car. Mr. Wilson, I'm Jeffrey Pearson. Your son has retained me because he's deeply concerned about your well-being. Recent behavioral changes, unusual spending, associating with people who may have ulterior motives. These can be early signs of cognitive decline. The only recent change in my social circle is that my son suddenly reappeared after a 6-year absence, coincidentally right after hearing rumors about my will, I replied. Franklin's face flushed. That's not fair. I've been busy building my career, starting a family. You've been married for 10 years without children, and you haven't held the same job for more than 18 months since college. I interrupted. Let's not rewrite history. See? Franklin turned to his lawyer. He's becoming hostile and paranoid. Classic signs of dementia. The lawyer nodded sympathetically, as if witnessing exactly what he'd expected. Mr. Wilson, if you refuse to cooperate, we may need to pursue guardianship proceedings for your own protection. The threat hung in the air. Guardianship meant losing control over my own decisions, my own life. It meant Franklin and this shark of a lawyer would have legal authority over my finances, my home, even my medical care. I think you should both leave, I said firmly. Now, we're not going anywhere until we sort this out, Franklin replied, moving toward my desk. Where do you keep your important papers? Banking statements, investment accounts. Before I could stop him, he began opening desk drawers, rifling through my personal documents. This is trespassing, I said, standing up. You don't have the right to search my home. I'm your son, Franklin replied without looking up from the drawer he was searching. I have every right to protect you from yourself. Being my son doesn't give you the right to invade my privacy. Stop going through my desk and leave my house. Or what? Franklin looked up with a smirk. You'll call the police on your own son? That would just further demonstrate your impaired judgment. The lawyer placed a restraining hand on Franklin's arm. Perhaps we should take a more measured approach. He turned to me with practiced concern. Mr. Wilson, we're only here because your son cares deeply about your well-being. He's worried that you're being influenced by people who see you as a source of money, not as a person. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Franklin had treated me as nothing but a source of money for decades. As the confrontation escalated, the doorbell rang. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer it or continue dealing with the situation at hand. Expecting more people taking advantage of your generosity? Franklin sneered. I ignored him and went to the door. When I opened it, Josh stood on the porch, his face alight with excitement. Delmar, you won't believe it, I got the acceptance letters. Cornell and Michigan both said yes, with scholarship offers too. He was waving envelopes, practically bouncing with energy. Before I could respond, Franklin appeared behind me. Who the hell are you? He demanded. Josh's smile faltered. I'm Josh. I'm a friend of Delmar's from the community center. Franklin's face darkened as he looked the boy over, taking in his worn jeans and secondhand jacket. So you're the con artist who's been manipulating my father, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. How much have you already squeezed out of him? 50,000? 100,000? Josh took a step back, confusion and hurt crossing his face. What? I haven't. Save it. Franklin cut him off. I know exactly what's happening here. Find yourself a vulnerable old man. Play up the sad story. Act like you care about him. Then clean out his bank accounts. Franklin, that's enough, I said sharply. No, it's not nearly enough, Franklin replied, his voice rising. This is elder abuse, plain and simple. This kid and whoever put him up to this should be in jail. Josh had gone pale. Sir, I don't know who you are, but you've got this all wrong. Delmar has been helping me with school and engineering projects. He's been he hesitated, then continued with quiet dignity. Like a grandfather to me. I've never asked him for money. Like a grandfather? Franklin laughed bitterly. That's rich. He already has family. He doesn't need some random kid playing pretend to get his hands on our inheritance. The lawyer appeared in the doorway, observing the interaction with keen interest. Josh straightened his shoulders, looking Franklin directly in the eye. Delmar is the sharpest person I know. He helps me understand calculus concepts my teachers can't explain. He designs engineering solutions off the top of his head. He remembers details from conversations we had months ago. The boy turned to me, his expression earnest. I don't know what's happening here, but whatever he's saying about you not being in your right mind is completely wrong. You're the most mentally clear person I know, regardless of age. Something shifted in me as I listened to Josh defend my mental capacity with such conviction. This teenager, being verbally attacked by an adult, still stood his ground out of loyalty to me. The contrast with Franklin, who hadn't shown me basic respect in years, couldn't have been more stark. Josh is right, I said firmly. And Franklin, you need to leave. Now. Both of you. I included the lawyer in my gaze. This isn't over, Franklin warned. Not by a long shot. I'm not going to stand by while you get fleeced by opportunists. The only person who has ever treated me like an ATM machine is you, I replied. Josh has never asked me for a dime. In fact, he took a night job because he was worried about being a financial burden to me. Franklin scoffed. And you believe that? God, you really are losing it. Get out of my house, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, or I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. The lawyer touched Franklin's arm. We should go. We've accomplished what we came for today. That cryptic statement worried me, but I maintained my composure as they finally exited. Once they were gone, I turned to Josh, who looked shaken. I'm so sorry you had to experience that, I told him. Who was that? Josh asked. My son, I replied simply. Josh's eyes widened. I didn't even know you had a son. There's a reason for that, I said. Come inside. I think it's time I told you the full story. As Josh followed me in, I realized this confrontation had marked a turning point. Franklin wasn't just making idle threats, he was preparing for a legal battle. And based on the lawyer's parting words, today's intrusion had been just the opening salvo. The certified letter arrived 3 days after Franklin's confrontation at my house. The return address was from Pearson and Whitmore law offices. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, though I'd been expecting something like this. Inside was a formal notice that Franklin had filed an emergency petition for guardianship in the county court, citing concerns about my rapidly declining cognitive state and vulnerability to financial exploitation. A hearing was scheduled for the following week. I immediately called Barbara. They're moving faster than I expected, she said after I described the documents. Emergency petitions usually require evidence of immediate danger. They must be painting a very dire picture. They're claiming I'm being financially exploited by Josh and the youth center, I explained. Franklin's lawyer made it sound like I'm giving away my entire fortune to strangers. Bring the papers to my office this afternoon, Barbara said. We'll prepare our response. And Delmar, don't worry. We have the facts on our side. When I arrived at Barbara's office, she had already pulled my file and was reviewing my medical evaluations. These cognitive assessments are our strongest evidence, she said. Both neurologists gave you perfect scores and specifically noted there were no signs of impairment. We'll also submit financial records showing your investment performance. No one with cognitive decline manages money as successfully as you have. What about Josh and Tara? Will they need to testify? Barbara considered this. It might help to have character witnesses who can speak to your mental clarity and decision-making abilities. Is Josh willing to appear in court? I'll ask him, but I hate to drag him into this ugliness. The court hearing was set for Tuesday morning. On Sunday evening, my phone rang. It was Walter Davis, who had served on the library board with me for years. Delmar, I'm calling because I'm concerned, he began awkwardly. Franklin visited me today. He said you've been giving away large sums of money to people you barely know and acting erratically. He asked me to testify about changes I've noticed in your behavior. My stomach tightened. What did you tell him? That I haven't noticed any changes, because there haven't been any, Walter replied firmly. But Delmar, he's approaching everyone. He's been to the golf club, the church, even the grocery store, talking to the manager you've known for years. He's spreading this story all over town. After hanging up with Walter, I received 5 more similar calls that evening. Franklin was systematically contacting everyone in my social circle, trying to build a case that I was mentally incompetent. Some called to reassure me of their support, but others seemed hesitant, as if Franklin had planted seeds of doubt. The next day at the community center, Maureen pulled me aside. "Someone's been asking questions about you and Josh," she said quietly. "A man claiming to be conducting a background check for a scholarship opportunity. But the questions were all about your relationship, how much time you spend together, whether you've given him gifts, if you seem easily influenced." By Monday evening, the damage was becoming clear. 3 people canceled plans with me, making transparent excuses. My neighbor Sandra reported that rumors were spreading about my condition, with some suggesting I was developing Alzheimer's. Even more painful was the call from Pastor Roberts at the church I'd attended for 30 years. "Delmar, I'm calling as your spiritual advisor," he began in his gentle voice. "When families are in conflict, sometimes the wisest course is forgiveness and reconciliation. Perhaps you should consider making peace with Franklin. Family is so important, especially as we age." "Pastor, Franklin abandoned this family years ago," I replied. "He's only interested now because of money." There was an uncomfortable pause. "Franklin seems genuinely concerned about your well-being. He showed me some concerning examples of recent decisions that seem uncharacteristic for you." The implication was clear. My pastor of 3 decades was siding with Franklin after one conversation. Tuesday morning arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Barbara met me at the courthouse steps, professional and composed in a navy suit. Josh and Tara waited nervously nearby, both having taken time off to support me. "Remember," Barbara said quietly as we walked in, "let me do most of the talking. Answer questions directly and calmly. Don't show anger toward Franklin, no matter what is said." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. Franklin and his lawyer sat at the table on the left, while Barbara and I took the right. Josh and Tara sat directly behind us. Judge Harriet Monroe, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, entered and called the hearing to order. Franklin's lawyer presented their case first, painting a picture of me as a once shrewd businessman who had become confused and vulnerable after my wife's death. "Mr. Wilson has begun giving away substantial sums to individuals he's known for less than 2 years, the lawyer argued. He's altered his will to disinherit his only son in favor of a teenager he met at a community center. These are not the actions of someone thinking clearly." When Barbara's turn came, she systematically dismantled their arguments. She presented my cognitive assessments, financial records showing continued investment success, and affidavits from longtime associates attesting to my mental clarity. "What we have here," Barbara concluded, "is not a case of cognitive decline but of family estrangement. Mr. Franklin Wilson had minimal contact with his father for 6 years, never expressing concern for his welfare until he heard rumors about changes to his will. This petition isn't about protection, it's about control of assets." The judge asked me several direct questions about my relationship with Franklin, my financial decisions, and my reasons for supporting Josh's education. I answered calmly and clearly. When Josh took the stand as a character witness, he spoke eloquently about our mentoring relationship and described the complex engineering problems we'd solved together, hardly activities compatible with cognitive impairment. The hearing lasted 4 hours. At the end, Judge Monroe announced she would review the evidence and issue her ruling within a week. As we left the courthouse, Franklin approached me in the hallway. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You're making a huge mistake." "The mistake was believing you'd ever see me as more than a bank account," I replied. The next few days were a haze of anxiety and social fallout. The guardianship case had become the talk of our small community. People I'd known for decades suddenly treated me differently, speaking slower, simplifying conversations, watching me with concerned expressions. I began avoiding my usual haunts, the coffee shop where I read the morning paper, the park where I walked daily, even the grocery store where I'd shopped for 30 years. The weight of suspicion and pity was too heavy to bear. Josh and Tara became my anchors during this period. They visited daily, bringing dinner and normalcy. Josh never altered his behavior toward me, continuing to ask my advice on complex calculus problems and engineering concepts. "People are idiots," he declared one evening after hearing about another friend who had distanced themselves. "Anyone who spends 5 minutes talking to you knows there's nothing wrong with your mind." 5 days after the hearing, Barbara called with unexpected news. "I've been contacted by Andrea, Franklin's wife. She wants to meet with us privately." Andrea? Why would she want to meet? She wouldn't say specifically, just that she has information relevant to the guardianship case. She was very insistent that Franklin not know about the meeting. Curious and cautious, I agreed to meet Andrea at Barbara's office the next morning. Andrea looked different than when I'd last seen her 3 years earlier. The designer clothes and perfect makeup had been replaced by a simpler, more subdued appearance. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring as she sat across from us. "Thank you for meeting me," she began. "I need to tell you something important about Franklin's situation." She took a deep breath. Franklin lost his job 8 months ago. He was fired for misappropriating company funds. He's been pretending to go to work every day, but he's actually been trying to start a business that's going nowhere. We're completely broke. The revelation stunned me. He never mentioned losing his job. He doesn't want anyone to know. We've been living on credit cards, maintaining appearances. Our house is mortgaged to the limit. We're 3 months behind on payments. Bankruptcy is probably inevitable at this point. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Andrea looked down at her hands. "Because I'm filing for divorce, and I don't want to be part of this scheme to take control of your money. That's what this is all about." When Franklin heard you were changing your will, he saw it as the solution to all his problems. She reached into her purse and pulled out a phone. "I have texts and emails that show his real motives. He's been planning this for months, researching how to challenge wills, documenting anything he could use to suggest you're incompetent." She showed us message after message, Franklin discussing with friends how to secure the inheritance and strategizing about how to present me as mentally declining. Most damning was an email to his lawyer that read, "Need to move quickly on the guardianship. If we can get control before the hearing on the will challenge, we can access the accounts immediately. The old man has at least $4 million in liquid assets we could put to better use." Barbara carefully photographed each message with her phone. "May I ask why you're doing this?" I said finally. "This will obviously hurt Franklin's case." Andrea's expression hardened. "Because he lied to me too. He said you were actually suffering from dementia and needed protection. I believed him until I found these messages. That's when I realized he was manipulating everyone, including me. I won't be complicit in taking advantage of an elderly person." After Andrea left, Barbara was jubilant. "This is exactly what we needed. Clear evidence of Franklin's financial motives will completely undermine his case." 2 days later, Judge Monroe issued her ruling, firmly rejecting Franklin's petition for guardianship. She cited the overwhelming medical evidence of my cognitive health and noted the troubling timing and apparent financial motivation behind the petition. The victory should have felt triumphant, but instead left me with a hollow ache. My own son had tried to have me declared incompetent for financial gain. The community I'd been part of for decades had been all too willing to believe the worst. And while I'd won this battle, I knew the war wasn't over. Franklin would not give up so easily, especially now that his financial situation was desperate. As Barbara had warned me from the beginning, this was just the opening skirmish in what could become a lengthy legal siege. The dismissal of Franklin's guardianship petition sent ripples through our community. Some who had distanced themselves now reached out with awkward apologies. Others maintained a cautious distance, as if cognitive decline might be contagious. The wounds of betrayal, not just from Franklin, but from people I'd considered friends, ran deep. Pastor Roberts called the day after the ruling. "Delmar, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken with you before forming any opinions based on Franklin's claims." "Yes, you should have," I replied, not bothering to hide my disappointment. "I've attended your church for 30 years, Pastor. Did you really think I would suddenly lose my faculties without you noticing during our regular conversations?" His discomfort was audible. I made a mistake in judgment. Franklin presented some very convincing. "Well, that's no excuse. I hope you can forgive me." I wasn't ready to offer absolution. "I'll see you on Sunday, Pastor," I said instead, and ended the call. Walter Davis organized an impromptu gathering at the library board meeting. To celebrate justice prevailing, the invitation read. 7 of the 9 board members attended, offering support and expressing outrage at Franklin's tactics. Their solidarity was a balm, but it didn't erase the fact that most had harbored at least some doubts about my mental capacity. The most painful encounter came at the grocery store. Eleanor Winters, who had taught Franklin in 3rd grade and had been Mary's close friend, avoided making eye contact when we passed in the produce section. When I directly approached her, she fumbled with her shopping list. "Eleanor, we've known each other for 35 years, I said quietly. "You were at my wedding. You came to Mary's funeral. Did you really believe I was losing my mind?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Franklin was so convincing, Delmar. He had stories about things you'd supposedly done, memory lapses, unusual behaviors. He said you didn't even recognize him sometimes." "All lies," I said. "He hasn't spent more than 3 hours in my presence in the last 6 years. There's no way he could have observed any such things." "I realize that now," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The support I most valued came from unexpected quarters. My former employees organized what they called a brain trust reunion at my house. 23 people who had worked in my engineering firm gathered on my back patio, some traveling considerable distances. Thomas Chen, who had been my chief engineer before starting his own company, raised a toast. To Delmar Wilson, the sharpest mind in structural engineering for 4 decades, and still going strong. They presented me with a bound volume of successful projects we had completed together, each annotated with personal notes about my contributions and leadership. The gesture moved me deeply. "We heard about what was happening," Thomas explained. None of us believed it for a second. The Delmar Wilson we know could calculate load-bearing requirements in his head while negotiating contracts and remembering everyone's birthdays. At the community center, support took a different form. The teenagers I'd been mentoring created a video montage documenting the complex projects we'd completed together. Josh had filmed our sessions working on everything from small engine repair to computer programming, clearly showing my technical explanations and problem-solving abilities. "We're going to title it, 'Does This Look Like a Man with Dementia?' and put it on YouTube," Josh announced proudly. "Maybe we should choose a less confrontational title," I suggested, touched by their loyalty but wary of escalating the situation. Maureen, the center director, organized a community appreciation event ostensibly to thank all volunteers, but it quickly became clear I was the guest of honor. The walls were decorated with photos of the various workshops I'd led, and several students spoke about skills they'd learned from me. "Before Mr. Wilson started teaching here, I couldn't even change a tire," said Leslie, a 19-year-old single mother. "Now I've fixed my own brakes and replaced my water pump. Saved me hundreds of dollars I don't have." The event received coverage in the local newspaper, complete with photos and quotes from students about my mentorship. I didn't realize until later that Tara had orchestrated the media presence, strategically creating public documentation of my ongoing community contributions. As these shows of support multiplied, I began to regain my footing in the community, but the experience had changed me. I was more cautious now, more selective about who I trusted with my thoughts and feelings. One evening, I received an unexpected phone call. The number wasn't familiar, but something made me answer rather than letting it go to voicemail. "Delmar? It's Andrea." Franklin's wife was the last person I expected to hear from again. "I wanted you to know, I've filed the divorce papers. Franklin will be served tomorrow." "I'm sorry it came to this," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I took no joy in the dissolution of my son's marriage. "There's something else you should know," Andrea continued. "Franklin's been telling people the judge was biased and that he's going to appeal the guardianship ruling. He's becoming desperate as our financial situation worsens." "Thank you for the warning," I replied. "May I ask you something? Why did Franklin stop contacting me all those years ago? Was it your influence, as I've sometimes suspected?" There was a long pause. "It wasn't me," she finally said, though I didn't encourage the relationship either. "Franklin has always had issues with his sense of entitlement. When you stopped automatically saying yes to his business ventures, he took it as a personal rejection. He convinced himself you didn't believe in him, that you were punishing him for not following exactly in your footsteps. I've funded over a dozen of his failed ventures, I said. How was that not believing in him? In Franklin's mind, you should have funded him indefinitely, without question or limit. When you started asking for business plans and results, he felt judged and controlled. The insight into Franklin's perspective was illuminating, if not entirely surprising. There's one more thing, Andrea said hesitantly. I found text messages suggesting Franklin plans to show up at your house tonight. Something about a face-to-face that will settle everything. I'm worried about what he might do in his current state. I thanked her for the warning and immediately called Josh. Can you and Tara come over tonight? I'd rather not be alone. I'll explain when you get here. They arrived within the hour, and I filled them in on Andrea's call. Josh immediately went into protective mode. I'm staying the night, he declared. If he's planning something shady, he should know you're not alone. Tara nodded agreement. I'll need to leave for my shift at 11, but Josh can stay. We were in the middle of dinner when the doorbell rang. Josh moved to answer it, but I placed a hand on his arm. Let me, I said. This is between Franklin and me. I opened the door to find my son swaying slightly on the porch, his eyes bloodshot, his expensive shirt wrinkled. The smell of alcohol was unmistakable. We need to talk, he slurred, pushing past me into the foyer. He stopped short when he saw Josh and Tara at the dining table. Of course they're here, he spat. Your replacement family. The con artists who turned you against your own son. Franklin, you're drunk, I said calmly. This isn't the time for a conversation. When is the time, Dad? When you're signing everything over to these strangers? When there's nothing left for your actual family? Josh stood up, his posture tense but controlled. Mr. Wilson, I think you should leave. Delmar doesn't need this right now. Franklin's laugh was bitter. Listen to this kid, Delmar doesn't need this right now. Like he knows what my father needs better than his own son. Josh does know what I need, I said quietly. He's taken the time to find out, which is more than you've done in years. Franklin's face contorted with anger. I just found out Andrea's leaving. Did you know that? She's filing for divorce. Everything's falling apart. And you're playing house with these people instead of helping your own son. I'm sorry about your marriage, I said sincerely. But your current problems aren't my responsibility to solve. Easy for you to say from your comfortable retirement, Franklin sneered. Some of us are still trying to make something of ourselves without a daddy to fund everything. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I funded everything for decades, Franklin. I paid for your education, your wedding, your first house down payment, and over a dozen business attempts. What did you do with those opportunities? So this is punishment? Cut me off when I need help the most. This isn't punishment, it's reality. I'm not an inexhaustible resource for you to tap whenever you make poor decisions. Franklin's expression shifted, a calculating look replacing the anger. Dad, I'm desperate here. The house is in foreclosure. I owe money to people you don't want me owing money to. Just a loan to get back on my feet, $200,000. You won't even miss it. The answer is no, Franklin. His face darkened again. Because you're giving it all to them? Your little replacement family? I'm supporting Josh's education because he's earned it through his character, work ethic, and genuine care for others' qualities I tried and failed to instill in you. The words were harsh but true. After decades of enabling Franklin's poor choices, clarity felt necessary, even if it hurt us both. Franklin looked from me to Josh and Tara, then back again. Something shifted in his expression, a realization, perhaps, that his usual tactics wouldn't work this time. This isn't over, he said, the same threat he'd made before. But this time it sounded hollow, the desperate bluster of a man who had played his last card and lost. As he turned to leave, he stumbled slightly. I'm calling an Uber for you, I said, taking out my phone. Don't bother, he snapped, but made no move to stop me as I ordered the car. We waited in uncomfortable silence until the driver arrived. As Franklin walked unsteadily down the porch steps, I felt a complex mix of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also a deep sadness for what might have been. Franklin, I called after him. When you're ready to have a real relationship, one that isn't about money, let me know. He didn't turn around, just raised his hand in a dismissive gesture as he got into the car. As I closed the door, I felt both drained and oddly liberated. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of Franklin's expectations and entitlement. Standing firm, finally establishing clear boundaries, felt like putting down a heavy burden I'd carried for too long. Josh and Tara were waiting inside, their concern evident. "Are you okay?" Tara asked gently. "I think I will be," I replied, for the first time in a very long time. The weeks following Franklin's drunken visit brought a strange new rhythm to my life. The legal battles had quieted after Judge Monroe's firm ruling against the guardianship petition. Franklin, facing divorce proceedings and financial collapse, retreated from his aggressive stance, at least temporarily. I found myself reflecting on the relationships that had been tested by this ordeal. Some strengthened, others revealed as shallow or conditional. Most importantly, I considered what kind of relationship, if any, might still be possible with my son. Barbara called with updates on the legal situation. "Franklin's lawyer has withdrawn from representing him," she reported. "Apparently, there were issues with unpaid legal fees. No new attorney has filed an appearance, which suggests he may not have the resources to continue the fight. Has he filed any appeal of the guardianship ruling?" "No, and the deadline passed last week. Legally, I think we're in the clear for now." The news brought relief but not closure. The damage to our relationship already strained before these events seemed irreparable. Yet something in me resisted completely shutting the door on my only child. Life continued its forward momentum. Josh received his final college acceptance letters and decided on Cornell's engineering program. Attracted by their strong aerospace department and the substantial scholarship they offered, Tara was promoted to charge nurse at the hospital, a position that came with better hours and a meaningful salary increase. My volunteering at the community center expanded to 3 days a week. I was replanting Mary's rose garden on a mild spring morning when a car pulled into my driveway. I recognized it immediately. Franklin's 10-year-old BMW, once pristine but now showing signs of neglect. My son sat inside for several minutes before finally emerging, his appearance markedly different from his last visit. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He'd lost weight, and his formerly perfect haircut had grown out. "Dad," he said as he approached, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" I gestured toward the garden bench. I was just taking a break. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before Franklin spoke again. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior last time. I was drunk and desperate, and I said terrible things." "Yes, you did," I agreed, not making it easier for him. He looked down at his hands. "A lot has changed since then. The divorce is proceeding. I had to sell most of our things to pay debts. I'm staying in a studio apartment and working at Walter's hardware store until I figure out next steps." The humility in his voice seemed genuine, but I'd been fooled before. "What brings you here today, Franklin? What do you need?" He winced at the directness of my question. "I deserve that. I know my track record." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, losing everything, the house, the marriage, the lifestyle, it's been a wake-up call. I've had to take a hard look at the choices I've made, including how I've treated you. And I realized I've been entitled and ungrateful. I took your support for granted while resenting the person providing it. I've spent weeks trying to understand why I became so disconnected from what actually matters." His words sounded rehearsed but not insincere, perhaps the practiced quality of someone who had been working with a therapist. "I've started seeing a counselor," he confirmed, as if reading my thoughts. "Twice a week. It was part of the agreement with Andrea. She'll consider a more amicable divorce if I get help." "That seems wise," I said cautiously. "Dad, I know I've probably burned this bridge beyond repair, but I wanted to ask if there's any chance we could try to rebuild some kind of relationship. Not because I need money," he added quickly. "I understand that's over, and it should be, but because you're my father, and I've wasted too many years that we could have been part of each other's lives." I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. Instead, I saw something I hadn't seen in Franklin's eyes for decades: vulnerability. "What would rebuilding look like to you?" I asked. He seemed surprised by the question. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Maybe just starting small, a cup of coffee every couple of weeks. I could tell you about the progress I'm making. You could tell me about your life. Your volunteer work. The cautious hope in his voice triggered a complex mixture of emotions, suspicion born from experience, but also a father's innate desire to believe in his child's capacity for growth. Franklin, I appreciate your coming here today. I do. But trust is built through consistent actions over time, not promises or apologies. If you're serious about rebuilding a relationship, it won't happen in one conversation. I understand, he said, nodding. I'm willing to put in the work, however long it takes. I made a decision then, one that balanced caution with compassion. I have Sunday dinner with Josh and Tara every week. They're an important part of my life now, my chosen family. If you want to begin rebuilding our relationship, it starts with respecting that reality. You're welcome to join us this Sunday, but only if you can be civil and respectful. Franklin looked startled by the invitation. You'd want me there? After everything? Want is a strong word, I replied honestly. But I'm willing to give you an opportunity to demonstrate through actions that your intentions are genuine. The choice is yours. He nodded slowly. I'll be there. What time? Should I bring anything? 6 o'clock. And no, just yourself and an open mind. After Franklin left, I called Josh and Tara to warn them about the dinner invitation. Their reactions were predictably protective. Are you sure that's a good idea? Josh asked. After everything he put you through? I'm not sure of anything, I admitted. But he's still my son. If there's even a small chance of genuine change, I need to leave that door open. Sunday arrived with nervous energy hanging over the house. I prepared Mary's traditional pot roast, a meal that had always been Franklin's favorite as a child. Josh arrived early to help set the table, his posture tense. Just remember, I'm here if he starts anything, he said, arranging forks with unnecessary precision. He's not going to start anything, I assured him. And if he did, I'm perfectly capable of handling it myself. Tara arrived next, bringing her famous apple crumble for dessert. She gave me a tight hug. We're with you. Whatever happens, she whispered. Franklin arrived exactly at 6, carrying a small potted plant, Mary's favorite variety of orchid. The gesture surprised me. I hadn't expected him to remember such a detail. Mom always kept these on the kitchen windowsill, he said awkwardly, handing me the plant. I saw it at the garden center where I've been working weekends. The dinner began with stiff conversation, careful questions about work, weather, neutral topics that wouldn't trigger tension. Gradually, as the meal progressed, the atmosphere softened slightly. Franklin asked Josh thoughtful questions about his college plans, genuinely interested in the young man's engineering aspirations. Cornell has an excellent aerospace program, he commented. I had a friend who went there, said the hands-on lab opportunities were incredible. Josh, initially guarded, began to engage more as he realized Franklin wasn't being patronizing or hostile. When Tara mentioned her promotion, Franklin congratulated her sincerely. 12 years of nursing must have taught you incredible patience, he observed. Something I'm trying to develop more of myself. By dessert, the conversation had found a tentative rhythm. Franklin shared some self-deprecating stories about adjusting to retail work after years in corporate settings. I completely embarrassed myself trying to mix paint for a customer, he admitted. Turns out there's an actual science to it, not just throwing colors together. The manager had to rescue me before I turned the poor woman's nursery paint into something that looked like swamp water. As coffee was served, Franklin addressed the elephant in the room. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to be here tonight, he said, his voice solemn. Especially you two. He nodded to Josh and Tara. I know I've given you every reason to distrust my motives and character. I'm grateful for the opportunity to show that I'm trying to change. Josh studied him for a moment. Why did you really come after your dad like that? Was it just about money? The directness of the question created a momentary tension, but Franklin nodded as if he'd expected it. The simple answer is yes. It was about money. I was drowning financially and saw my father's estate as a solution. But the more complicated truth is that it was also about entitlement. I'd convinced myself that I deserved that money, that it was somehow already mine. He looked at me. I never saw it as Dad's to give or withhold. In my mind, it was already my inheritance, and anyone else he gave it to was stealing from me. The admission was surprisingly insightful, suggesting his therapy might actually be having an impact. And now? Tara asked, her tone neutral but her eyes watchful. Now I'm learning to stand on my own feet for the first time in my life. It's terrifying and humbling, but also freeing in a way. I'm not waiting for someone else to solve my problems. After dinner, as Franklin prepared to leave, he thanked me again for the invitation. This meant a lot to me, he said. More than you know. One dinner doesn't erase years of behavior, I reminded him. But it's a start. Would it be okay if I called you later this week? He asked. Maybe we could have lunch. I nodded. That would be fine. As I watched him drive away, I felt cautiously hopeful, but resolved to maintain clear boundaries. True change required consistent effort over time, not just good intentions in the moment. Over the following months, Franklin gradually demonstrated that his commitment to rebuilding our relationship was genuine. He attended therapy regularly, took financial responsibility courses, and maintained his steady job at the hardware store while developing a modest handyman business on weekends. Our regular lunches became a fixture, evolving from cautious conversations into more meaningful exchanges. He asked questions about my life, and actually listened to the answers. He showed interest in my volunteer work, eventually offering to help rebuild the community center's storage shed, a project he completed with thoroughness and care. His relationship with Josh evolved too, moving from polite distance to genuine respect. When Josh needed help moving into his Cornell dormitory, Franklin volunteered his truck and an entire weekend of labor. The two discovered a shared interest in vintage cars, leading to lively debates about restoration techniques over Sunday dinners. 1 year after the failed guardianship attempt, our landscape had transformed dramatically. Josh had completed his freshman year with honors, thriving in Cornell's engineering program, while working part-time at a satellite office of my old firm during summer break. Tara had been accepted into a nurse practitioner program, studying part-time while continuing her hospital work. Franklin had moved into a modest house he was slowly renovating himself, developing actual practical skills in the process. He'd started dating again, a kindergarten teacher named Laura, who seemed to value simplicity and authenticity over status or appearance. Most significantly, I had established the Wilson Educational Foundation, using a portion of my estate to help disadvantaged youth access technical education and apprenticeships. The foundation's first class of scholarship recipients included 16 students from our community center, each pursuing careers in fields ranging from electrical work to computer programming to medical technology. On a warm evening in June, we gathered on my back patio to celebrate the foundation's launch. Community members, scholarship recipients, and board members mingled over catered food and lively conversation. Franklin had helped organize the event, managing logistics with unexpected competence. As twilight settled over the garden, I found a quiet moment to reflect on the journey of the past year. The pain and betrayal had been real, the wounds deep. Yet from that darkness had emerged unexpected light, stronger bonds, clearer priorities, newfound purpose. "Penny for your thoughts," said a voice beside me. Franklin had approached with 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one to me. "Just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns," I replied, accepting the drink. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this scene." Franklin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to tell you something. I finally read the terms of your revised will." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the topic. "Barbara showed it to you?" "No. I asked her to explain the general provisions. I wanted to understand your thinking." He paused. "The trust for Josh's education, the foundation, the modest provision for me. It's all extremely fair. More than fair, considering my behavior. It wasn't about punishing you," I explained. "It was about being responsible with resources, directing them where they could do the most good." "I understand that now," he said quietly. "And I wanted you to know I'm grateful for the second chance, not at the inheritance, but at being your son." As we rejoined the gathering, I watched the interconnected circles of people who had become my extended family, some by blood, others by choice, all by meaningful connection. Josh was explaining an engineering concept to a group of scholarship students, his hands animating the air. Tara was deep in conversation with Laura, Franklin's new girlfriend, both laughing at some shared observation. Franklin himself moved comfortably among the foundation board members, no longer the entitled son but a contributing member of the community. The greatest lesson of this painful journey had been about the true nature of family. It wasn't defined by obligation or bloodlines alone, but by who showed up consistently, who contributed positively to your life, who stood by you in difficult moments. Family could be born or chosen, traditional or unconventional. What mattered was the authenticity of the connection. Money hadn't created my problems with Franklin, but it had revealed character, both his and mine. How we handled prosperity, how we faced adversity, how we treated others when we thought no one was watching. These were the true measures of who we were. As I looked around at the gathering, my chosen family, my biological son working to earn his place back in my life, the young people whose futures would be brighter because of educational opportunities, I felt a deep sense of peace. The path had been painful, but the destination was worth every difficult step. Have you ever had to make difficult decisions about family relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about family, growth, and redemption. And if you know someone who might find meaning in this journey, please share it with them. Thank you for listening, and may you find wisdom and peace in your own family relationships, whatever form they may take.